My youngest sister took the fork out of my older sister's hand, tapped it twice against her own water glass, and stood up in the middle of somebody else's engagement toast. 31 people set down their forks. We were in the back room at Riccardi's, the one with the pressed tin ceiling, because Bethany had wanted the two families to meet somewhere with cloth napkins. Grant's parents had driven up from Columbus that morning, and his mother had brought a photo album. Him at 8 years old in a Little League uniform, open on the tablecloth between the bread baskets. Nobody ever got to page 2. "I need to say this before the cake," Sloane said. "It's going to come out anyway. I'd rather it come out of my mouth." Bethany was still holding her glass at half height. She had rehearsed her toast in the car. "I know, because I was in the car." "I'm 13 weeks, Sloane said. She laid her hand flat on her stomach so the room would know where to look. "And before anybody does the math out loud, yes, it's Grant's." The tin ceiling took the sound and gave it back twice. Grant's mother reached over and closed the photo album. "Sloane, that was our mother, and there was no warning in it. That was a hand on a wrist, the way you steady somebody who is giving a reading at church." "No, I'm saying it." Sloane turned to face our end of the table, facing me. "Because you two have spent a year pretending you're the ones holding this family together. Bethany's had a ring for 100 days. Diana had a whole husband. She let it sit. He left her over a nursing home. She picked our grandmother over her own marriage, and she still tells people she's fine." Nobody spoke. Grant's father looked at the water pitcher. "Neither of you could hold a man," Sloane said. "I'm the one carrying his." 9 seconds. I counted them, and I have counted them since, and for 9 of them the loudest thing in that room was the air conditioning. Then our mother said, "Don't make a scene, Diana." I hadn't made a sound. "Your sister is carrying the only grandchild this family is going to get," she said. "Let her have her night." Bethany set her glass down without drinking from it, and Sloane lifted her right hand, the way you do when you want a room to see a ring. And there it was on her middle finger, riding loose because it was cut for somebody else's knuckle. Garnet, in a rose gold basket, worn thin on one side by 60 years of dishwater. "Gran wanted me to have it," she said, "and she wants the house sold. It closes in April, because a baby needs a nursery more than an empty house needs a lawn." Our grandmother was sitting 4 seats down from her. Adele Paxton, 84, in the blue cardigan with the pilled elbows, out of the memory unit for the first time in a year, because Belhaven will sign a resident out for a family event if a responsible party fills out the form. It's 3 pages. Bethany had asked me, so I had done it on my lunch break, including the section where you list the medications and the times. Gran heard applause start at the far end of the table, so she put her hands together too. She smiled at the sound the way you smile at weather. Her right hand was bare, and there was a pale band on the middle finger where 60 years of ring had been that afternoon. I stood up. 31 people watched me pick up the bottle of Chianti by the neck. I walked around behind my mother's chair, filled Sloane's glass to the fat part of the bowl the way she likes it, set the bottle down, and said, "Congratulations." She looked at me for a second, checking for the trick. Then she picked it up and drank it in front of both families and set it down empty. I said, "There's more if you want it." My thumbnail had gone through the foil on the bottleneck. That was the only part of me that did anything. I wasn't being brave, and I wasn't being broken. I have been my grandmother's healthcare power of attorney since February of 2023, when she still knew what she was signing, and in 3 years of that job I have learned exactly one thing. You cannot win an argument in a room. You win it with paper, and you only get paper if the other person keeps talking. My phone was face down beside the bread basket. I had started the recorder when I stood up to pour, and I had already checked, out in the parking lot, that Ohio needs 1 person in a conversation to consent, and that person is allowed to be you. So I refilled her glass, and she kept talking. And everything she said for the next 40 minutes about the closing date and the appraisal and the nursery went into a file with a timestamp on it. Sloane had 9 days left of being the only person at that table who thought she knew what was in her own paperwork. In 9 days I would have a photograph of page 4. I'm Diana Paxton. I'm 29, and I work as a closing assistant at a title agency in Millbury, Ohio, which means I spend my days reading the parts of documents that people sign without reading. This is the story of the 5 months between that dinner and the Wednesday morning I'm speaking to you from. Stay with me if you want to know how it ended for every single person in that room. And if there is somebody in your family who has been handling the money and telling you it's handled, tell me about them in the comments. I read all of them now. 2 days later, one page with my name on it took the first thing my sister was counting on. Here's how. On the Monday, I drove to Belhaven on my way to work and filled out a form called a Notification of Objection by Healthcare Representative. It is half a page of boxes. It goes in the residence chart. And what it does is require the facility to hold any change in level of care or room assignment until the representative on file has been consulted in writing. I signed it at the business office counter at 8:15 in the morning with a pen on a chain. The administrator, Ruth Okonjo, read it twice and made a copy for me and one for the chart, and she said, "Is something happening with your family, Diana?" I said, "Something's happening with the house." At 4:10 that afternoon, my phone rang while I was scanning a title commitment. "What did you do?" Sloane said. I said, "You'll have to be more specific." "They just called me. They said they can't process the room change. They said there's an objection on file. Diana, I have a closing in April. Do you understand what you're doing to this family?" I turned my chair so the scanner light wasn't in my eyes. "I filled out a form," I said. "You know I do the forms." She hung up on me. 6 minutes later, my mother called, and I let it ring. And the voicemail she left was 91 seconds long, and I saved that too. That was the first time a piece of paper with my name on it made my sister lose something. It felt like nothing. It felt like being at work. The feeling came later, in the parking lot, when I looked up what a garnet ring in rose gold is worth, and learned that the metal in my grandmother's ring is worth about $90. They were going to sell a house for a nursery, and they had taken a $90 ring off a woman's hand 9 hours before dinner. And the only reason anybody at that table thought that was generous is that Sloane had said it out loud with her hand on her stomach. I sat in my car for a while. Then I drove to the county recorder's office on Tuesday morning, took a number, and paid $6. I could have pulled both documents at my desk. My agency pays for a search service. I have a login. It would have taken 4 minutes and cost nothing, and nobody would ever have known. I took a number instead and stood at the window behind a man renewing a vendor's license, and I paid $6 in cash for certified copies with the county's raised seal on them, because whatever was coming, I was not going to do it the way they did it. 2 documents. The recorded deed for 118 Wynn Street, which is the house my grandfather bought in 1971, and my grandmother has never once called an investment. And 2 instruments dated and recorded on the 2nd of March, 2026. A general durable power of attorney and a healthcare power of attorney, granting Sloane Paxton authority over the property, the money, and the medical decisions of Adele M. Paxton, and purporting to revoke every designation made before them, including mine. I read the second one in the car with the engine off. Page 4 is the acknowledgement. It's the part nobody reads. It has the date, the time if the notary is thorough, the notary's commission number, and the signatures of the witnesses, and my mother is thorough. She has been a notary public for 22 years. It's how she got the raise at Vance and Doyle, and she keeps the stamp in the same drawer as the batteries. Notarized March 2, 2026 at 4:10 p.m. Notary, Denise A. Paxton. Witness 1, Denise A. Paxton. Witness 2, Grant M. Whitaker. A notary is not supposed to be one of the witnesses to the signature she is acknowledging. That by itself is not a crime. It's just what a document looks like when the person filling it out has never once expected a stranger to read it. Then I opened my messages and scrolled back to March 2nd. Because when you are the healthcare representative on file, You get a call and a text for everything, and the facility does not care what else you are doing that day. Bellhaven, March 2nd, 3:41 p.m. Adele transported to Fairview ED, possible UTI with confusion, per protocol. Bellhaven, March 2nd, 3:48 p.m. In triage, will update. Fairview discharge summary. Fax to me the next morning, which I keep because I keep everything. Patient-oriented to person only, unable to state month or year, mini mental exam score 11 of 30, discharged back to facility 8:20 p.m. with antibiotics. At 4:10 that afternoon, my grandmother was in a curtained bay at Fairview Hospital in a paper gown, unable to say what year it was, with a plastic band on the wrist that had worn a ring for 60 years. And at 4:10 that afternoon, according to page 4, she was at a kitchen table signing away a house in front of 2 witnesses. You want to know the worst thing about that discovery? It wasn't rage, it was recognition. Because I have watched my mother notarize documents at that kitchen table since I was in middle school, insurance forms, car titles, my own student loan papers. And she has always said the same sentence while she rolled the stamp. There, now it's real. I drove to work, and at lunch I did the second thing. My grandmother has a long-term care insurance policy. My grandfather bought it in 1994 from a man at his union hall, and my grandmother has mentioned it exactly twice in my hearing, both times to say, "Your grandfather thought of everything." As healthcare representative, I can't touch her money. But I am also listed as an authorized representative for benefit communications because I'm the one who submitted the claim in 2023, and an authorized representative can ask a single, boring question in writing. So I asked it. 1 paragraph, on paper, mailed with a stamp, requesting a statement of benefits paid under the policy since February 2023, including the amount of each payment and the name of the payee. Then I went back to my desk and waited 9 business days, which is how long that company takes. And while I waited, I went to Sunday dinner. There were 4 of us at the table on the 15th, plus Grant, plus a folding chair for a car seat that did not exist yet. Sloane had a laptop open next to her plate with a browser tab of nursery furniture, and she was narrating prices. My mother was serving. My father was eating with his head down, the way he has eaten every meal since 2011. Bethany was not talking. Bethany had not really talked since the restaurant, and nobody in that house had noticed, which tells you something about that house. So the boutique in Rockvale has the dress, Sloane said. For the shower. It's $215, which is insane, but everything for pregnant people is insane. She turned her laptop toward me, which is not the same as asking, "You get paid on the 15th, right?" I said, "The dress is for a shower in July. It's for photos in April." She said it slowly, like I was the one being difficult. "Diana, I'm carrying your niece." "You're carrying somebody," I said. My mother's serving spoon stopped in the green beans for a quarter second. Nobody else caught it. I did, and I filed it, and I have thought about that quarter second more than any other quarter second in my life. "Give her the card," my mother said. "You have nothing else you're saving for." Here is what I did, in the right order. I gave my sister my debit card. She bought a $215 dress on it that night while I was doing the dishes. I kept the receipt. 11 weeks later, a lawyer in Columbus made a list of every dollar that had come into Sloane Paxton's hands between January and May, and the $215 of mine was the only line on it that made her look worse instead of better, because you cannot claim you were coerced while you are buying a photo shoot dress on your sister's card. At the sink, Gran's ring came into my head. Not the version on Sloane's finger. The version from 2002, when I was 5 and stayed at Wynn Street for 4 days while my mother had Sloane, and Gran stood me on a step stool and let me wear the ring while we did the dishes because, she said, Garnet likes hot water. It was 3 sizes too big. She wrapped a strip of masking tape around the back of the band so it would stay on my finger. I dried my hands on my jeans and went to find my father in the garage. "The house on Wynn," I said. "Who's handling the closing?" He didn't look up from the workbench. "Grant knows a guy," Dad, who's handling Grand's money? And there it is. The sentence this family has answered every question with for 3 years, the one I had accepted 600 times, because it let me sleep. It's handled, Di. It's always been handled. You just cover the gap. The gap. $1,180 a month. Automatic transfer. Memo line, Bell Haven Gap, out of my account on the 3rd of every month since March of 2023. 37 months. I have never once been late. I said, okay. Then I went home and put the certified copies in a folder, and the folder in the trunk of my car, because a trunk is a place nobody in my family has ever looked. 9 days after the dinner, they held an open house at 118 Wynn Street. A house cannot be sold under a power of attorney signed by a woman who could not name the month, and I knew that on the Tuesday. I could have stood on that lawn screaming it at 19 strangers. A woman screaming on a lawn is a woman with a mental health problem. A woman with a certified copy is a complainant. Those are the two options, and they do not overlap. So I went, and I helped. Grant had the signs out on Wynn Street, and the door propped with Grand's cast-iron doorstop, the rooster. Sloane was in the kitchen with a plate of grocery store cookies telling a couple from Avon that the neighborhood was up and coming, in a house where a woman had lived for 55 years. My mother handed me 2 contractor bags when I came through the door. The upstairs closet, she said. Just the clothes. If it smells, it goes. 19 strangers came through in 2 hours. I know because Grant was counting out loud, for morale. I was on the floor of the back bedroom with my grandmother's winter coat across my knees when the front door opened for the 20th time and a man came in who was not looking at the ceiling. Everyone else looked at the ceiling. That's what people do at an open house. They look up at the plaster to see if there are water stains. This man came in, closed the door behind him with the handle turned so it wouldn't bang, and looked at the people. I heard him ask, "Is Sloane here?" in the voice you use for a receptionist. He was 40-something, gray at the temples, a barn jacket over a button-down, and shoes that were too good for a Monday in Millbury. He had a folder under his arm. Not a listing sheet. A folder. I stood up in the doorway of the back bedroom with a coat in my hands, and I watched my sister come out of the kitchen with the cookie plate, and I watched her face do something I had never seen it do. She went the color of the plate. "Sloane," he said, and he was pleasant about it, which was somehow the worst part. "You've stopped answering, that's fine. But I drove 2 hours, so." He glanced at my mother, at Grant, at the strangers in the dining room. "Do they know I'm your—" Outside. Sloane had the cookie plate in one hand and his elbow in the other, and she was moving him through the door before he got to the noun. "We're going outside." The screen door hit the frame twice. Grant said to the room, "Water heaters from 2019, and the strangers went back to looking up at the plaster. I stood in that doorway holding my grandmother's coat. 9 days earlier, my sister had told 31 people whose baby she was carrying. 9 days later, a man had driven 2 hours from somewhere to finish a sentence about it, and he had a folder, and she got him off the property in 11 seconds. I went to the window. His car was at the curb, a gray crossover with an Ohio plate and a parking sticker from a hospital system in Columbus, and on the counter by the cookie plate, where he had set it down without thinking when he took her elbow, was a business card. I did not take it. I photographed it, and I put the coat in the contractor bag like I'd been told, and I carried both bags to the curb. Halloway, Dean R. Halloway, an address on West 5th Avenue in Columbus, and a mobile number, and no company name at all. He was there because of me. I need to back up 5 days to explain that, and I need you to understand that I didn't plan the man. I only planned the question. On the Wednesday, 5 days before the open house, Sloane came to my apartment for the first time since October and set a plastic accordion folder on my kitchen counter. "I can't do this part," she said. "You do this part." That's not a small sentence in my family. That's the family constitution. I have done the FAFSA for 2 of us. I did the paperwork when my father's hours got cut in 2011, and the mortgage company needed a hardship letter, and I was 14. I do the forms. Sloane cries at forms. My mother calls it sensitivity. What is it? I said. Bills, insurance stuff. There's a thing that keeps calling and I can't. She had her keys in her hand the whole time, which is how you know somebody isn't staying. Just sort it and tell me what to pay. Then she said, and don't be weird about the dinner. Everybody's over it. She left. I made tea. I put on the little cotton gloves I use at work for handling old recorded documents, which sounds theatrical and is actually just how I was trained, and I opened my sister's folder on my own kitchen counter at the invitation of my sister. Everything I am about to tell you, she handed me. Cable bill. A collection letter for a dental account. Her car insurance lapsed. And then, in the back pocket, 3 things that did not belong with any of it. 1. A payment schedule from a company in Cleveland called Vantage Fiduciary Escrow. Header: Gestational Carrier Escrow. Disbursement Schedule. Case number 2025 on 1108. 8 monthly disbursements of $4,250 to a carrier account, beginning January, plus line items I had to look up later. Maternity clothing allowance, $400. Lost wages. A completion payment held until delivery. 2. An appointment confirmation from a reproductive medicine center on Olentangy River Road in Columbus. Transfer procedure, December 22, 2025. 3. Page 4 of something. Only page 4. The way things end up in the wrong pocket. It was a signature page. Her name printed and signed on a line that said carrier. 2 other signatures on lines that said intended parent and intended parent, both of them scrawled, both of them ending in an H. And under her own name, on the line for the carrier's address, she had not written her apartment. She had written 118 Wynn Street, my grandmother's house, because by the time anybody came looking for her there, it was going to be hers. I stood in my kitchen with my hands in cotton gloves and did the arithmetic that 31 people had been invited to do at Riccardi's. 13 weeks on March 7th counts back to the first week of December. The transfer was the 22nd of December. I read 4 clinic pages about how they count it, because I wanted to be right before I was anything else. When a lab makes an embryo, the clock does not start on the day they put it in you. It starts days earlier in the lab, and the number they hand you is already more than 2 weeks ahead of your own calendar. Which means 13 weeks was not a lie. 13 weeks was a number off a printout, and nobody guesses 13 weeks. You do not stand up in a restaurant with your hand on your stomach and say 13 weeks unless somebody with a clipboard told you 13 weeks, and the people with the clipboards were on Olentangy River Road in Columbus, 2 hours south of that tin ceiling. She had rounded up 2 weeks to reach the month she needed. 2 weeks to make it land on Grant. And whatever was growing was on a payment schedule with somebody else's name on the last line. I want to say that I felt vindicated. What I actually felt was cold in my hands, because I was standing in a kitchen holding proof that my grandmother's house was being sold in April for a nursery that a company in Cleveland was already funding at $4,250 a month. I photographed all 3 documents on my counter, front and back, with the timestamp on. I put every page back in the order I found it, and I closed the folder. And at 8:52 that night, I sent 1 email. Not to Sloan, not to my mother, to the escrow administrator whose name was printed at the bottom of the disbursement schedule, from my own address, with my own name signed at the bottom, and I have read it enough times since to recite it. Good evening. I handle the household billing for Sloan Paxton, and I've been given a stack of accounts to reconcile. Before I pay anything, could you confirm which account the prenatal balance should be directed to, and whether disbursements under case 2025-1108 are current? I'd rather not send money to the wrong place. Thank you. Every word of that was true. I do handle the billing. I had been given a stack. I would rather not send money to the wrong place. I did not lie. I did not accuse anybody of anything, and I did not tell a single person in my family that I had learned to spell the word gestational. An automated reply came back in 4 minutes. A human never wrote to me at all. because that email did not go to a person who answers questions. It went into a file that had a client in it, and on Monday afternoon, a gray crossover with a hospital parking sticker pulled up in front of my grandmother's house, and a man in a barn jacket came in and closed the door quietly so it wouldn't bang, and looked at the people instead of the ceiling. He was not lost. He had driven 2 hours to the address my sister had written on her own contract. 9 days after my sister raised her glass, she had to physically remove a stranger from a property she was selling in front of 19 buyers, and she did it holding a plate of cookies. Nobody in my family asked who he was. That is not an exaggeration. My mother's exact words, in the kitchen, after the screen door hit the frame twice, were, "One of Grant's people." Grant said nothing at all, which was the second thing I filed that day. The insurance company took 9 business days, and the statement came on the 25th of March in a windowed envelope, and I read it standing at my mailbox in the cold with my keys still in the door. It's a boring document. It has a table. Adil M. Paxton, policy benefits paid. Elimination period satisfied March 2023. Monthly benefit, $1,180. First payment issued June 1st, 2023. 33 payments issued through February 2026. Total benefits paid, $38,940. Payee, responsible party of record. Mailed to 22 Larkspur Court, Millbury, Ohio. That's my parents' address. It's the address of the house I grew up in, and the mail comes in through a brass slot in the door and lands in a blue plastic bin on the floor of the front hall, and my mother sorts it standing up on Saturdays, and has for as long as I have been alive. $1,180 a month is not a number I picked at random when I set up that automatic transfer in March of 2023. It's the number my mother gave me. She wrote it on the back of an envelope at the kitchen table and slid it across and said, "That's the gap. That's what the insurance doesn't cover." That's what the insurance did cover. To the dollar. Every month. To her house. 33 checks came into that blue bin and were endorsed and deposited, and on the 3rd of every month my transfer left my account with Bellhaven Gap typed in the memo line, and Bellhaven was paid exactly once by 2 different women, and only one of us thought she was doing it. I stood at that mailbox and did the multiplication I had never once done, because for 3 years I had told myself it was rent I owed the woman who taped a ring onto my finger so I could do dishes. 37 payments of $1,180 is $43,660. I sat down on the concrete step outside my apartment in March, with my coat open. The gap I had been covering was the gap between what my family said and what my family did, and it had been exactly $1,180 wide, and I had been paying it monthly, on time, for 3 years, and every time I paid it, my mother told me I was a good girl. I didn't call her. I didn't call anybody. I went inside and I made a list, and at the top of the list I wrote the only sentence in this whole story that I said out loud to myself. Nobody in this family ever hands me anything except paperwork, and paperwork is the only thing in this family that has ever been true. Then, on the 28th of March, they moved my grandmother. My form worked, understand? That's the part I'll carry. The notification of objection meant Bellhaven could not change her room without consulting me in writing, so Sloane put the second document on the counter, the one that said the medical decisions were hers now, and did the other thing available to her. She discharged my grandmother from the facility entirely, against clinical advice, and signed the paper that says you were advised, and you're doing it anyway. Ruth Okonjo called me at 11:20 in the morning, and she did not sound like an administrator. She sounded like a woman standing in a hallway. "Diana, I need to tell you they're taking her. I've documented it." I told them what the discharge means for her medications and her placement on the memory unit, and the daughter came in with a healthcare power of attorney dated newer than yours and signed the acknowledgement. I am not the one who gets to decide which of the two is valid. I have made a referral. That's all I'm allowed to do. Referral to who? Adult Protective Services, County Job and Family Services. It goes in a queue. I asked how long a queue. She said, weeks. Sometimes longer, unless something changes. Fairlane Manor is a 6-bedroom split level on a cul-de-sac in Rockvale, with a wheelchair ramp built out of treated lumber and a hand-lettered sign in the front window. It is run by a woman from my mother's church named Charlene Boggs. It takes $1,800 a month, cash or check, against the $2,400 Bellhaven came to after her Social Security, and my grandfather's pension went to it. And it does not appear in any state licensure database, because I checked 3 times that night. I drove out on Sunday with a bag of clementines and a bottle of nail polish, the pearl pink she has worn since I was small. They had her in a rear bedroom with 2 beds in it. Her cardigan was on the wrong side of the room. Her hearing aid was not in her ear and nobody could tell me where it was, and her walker was in the hall, out of reach, against the wall, because of the doorway. I pulled a chair over and took her hand and started on her nails. She watched me work for a while with a pleasant, patient face, the face you give a stranger who is being kind to you. Then she said, "You're very good at this. Are you the girl from the bank?" I said, "Yes, Gran, I'm the girl from the bank." She said, "They always send someone nice." I finished both hands. I found her hearing aid in the pocket of a bathrobe hanging on the back of the bathroom door, put a fresh battery in it, and set the case on the nightstand where she could reach it. And I asked Charlene Boggs 3 questions about medication times and wrote her 3 answers down in front of her, dated, with her name spelled the way she spelled it for me. I did not raise my voice in that house. I have never raised my voice in front of my grandmother in my life, and I wasn't going to start in a rented back bedroom. I drove home. I sat in my car in the lot with the folder from my trunk on my knees. Then I opened a new note on my phone and typed 7 words. Stop paying, start collecting, let them close. That was the night I stopped being the one who covers the gap. On the 4th of April, I drove to 22 Larkspur Court and surrendered. I want to be exact about what surrender looked like, because it is the only performance I have ever given. They were all at the table. My mother had the good tablecloth on for no reason. Sloane had a binder now, a real one, with tabs, and Grant was there with a spiral of comparable sales, and there was a typed page in the middle of the table facing my chair. Family letter of no objection, it said at the top, in a font my mother thinks looks legal. It's for the file, Grant said. The buyer's people asked whether anybody in the family objects to the sale. It's a formality. I read it twice, slowly, because I wanted them to watch me read it twice. It had come out of a folder with another agency's name on the tab, and the buyer's title commitment was clipped behind it. And that is how I learned the name of the underwriter who was going to insure my grandmother's house, and the date and the address of the closing. Page 1. They watched me read it. Here is what a letter of no objection from me is worth. Nothing. I have no ownership interest in 118 Wynn Street. I could have signed 40 of those, and it would not have made a void power of attorney valid, and it would not have made a house sellable. And every person at that table thought it was the thing standing in their way, because none of them has ever read past page 1 of anything in their lives. I said, "Do you have a pen?" My mother handed me the good one from the drawer. I signed Diana R. Paxton and dated it and slid it back across the tablecloth, and my father looked up for the first time in a month. Then I said the sentence I had been saving. "You were right, Mom. It's handled. It's always been handled." I put the cap back on her pen. "So I've canceled the transfer, the 1180. It came out on the 3rd for the last time yesterday. You're the powers of attorney now, both of you, and I'm not going to keep paying a bill that's got somebody else's authority on it." Sloane looked up so fast that her hair moved. "You can't just stop." "I'm not on anything," I said. "That's the whole point of what you two did in March. I'm not on the account. I'm not on the deed. I'm not the financial representative. I'm the granddaughter who fills out forms." I stood and put my coat on. Which reminds me, the insurance reimbursement is still going to this address, and it shouldn't be. It should follow the power of attorney. I took a single sheet out of my bag, printed off the insurer's website that morning, and set it on the table in front of my sister. Change of payee, authorized party designation. Fill it out and mail it, I said. It's your money to handle now. My mother's hand came down flat on the tablecloth. That comes here, she said. That's always come here. Not anymore, Sloane said. And she pulled the form toward herself with 2 fingers, and she looked at our mother. And something happened between them that I will remember at Christmas for the rest of my life. 22 years of notary work in that woman's hands, and her youngest daughter took $1,180 a month off her with a form I printed for free. I drove home. She mailed it. I know, because I got a courtesy notice as the former authorized representative, dated April 9th, confirming a change of payee designation, signed S. Paxton, with a new mailing address and the last 4 digits of a new account. That's what a fake surrender is. You don't hand your enemy a weapon, you hand her a pen, and then you get out of the way, and she signs her own name to the thing that will be Exhibit 4. 9 days after that, the first thing I had planted went off in her world, and she never once thought of me. It was small. Escrow companies are careful. They do not accuse anybody. Vantage Fiduciary Escrow sent Sloane a letter stating that disbursements under Case 2025-1108 were suspended pending a compliance review at the request of the intended parents, and that the April payment of $4,250 would be held. She read it out loud to me over the phone at 9:40 that night, furious, without ever explaining what Case 2025-1108 was. They're holding my money because some woman in Cleveland got an email, she said, from a billing person. Do you believe that? A billing person. I was standing at my own sink with the water running. That's terrible, I said. You'd know about this. You do closings. Can they just hold it? If there's a contract, I said, they can do whatever the contract says. She said a word about the woman in Cleveland and hung up. For 11 days, my sister did not know why her money had stopped, and she took it out of everybody in a 100-mile radius. Those 11 days are where this story actually lives. On the 15th of April, she posted a photograph of an ultrasound with the caption, Adele Rose, named for the strongest woman I know. My grandmother, at that moment, was in a rear bedroom on a cul-de-sac in Rockvale where a woman from church was crushing her pills into applesauce without a chart. On the 16th, my mother called and asked me to come get the rest of the closet out of Wynn Street before the buyers walk through. And I went. And I loaded my car with a dead woman's mother's quilts while my sister sat on the porch steps in a coat that didn't button and told me the crib she wanted was $1,500 and everyone else in this family is stepping up. On the 19th, at Sunday dinner, she asked me for $4,250. She didn't call it that. She said $4,200, and she said it the way you ask for a ride to the airport. I have $22,000 in savings, I said. That's the truth. You can have none of it. Because you're saving it for what? Your cats? I don't have cats. That's not the point. My mother said, Diana, in the tone, and my father put down his fork. And Bethany, who had said maybe 40 words since Riccardi's, got up from the table and went out to the driveway and sat in her car for the rest of the meal. Nobody followed her. My mother said, She's tired. There's a woman in Cleveland holding my money, Sloane said. There's a home aide asking Charlene for money. There's a hospital bill. Do you understand that I am doing the one thing this family has been waiting 9 years for, and you're sitting there with $22,000 and a face? I said, I understand it. Then I asked her, with my hands folded on the tablecloth, Sloane, what's case 2025-1108? The room did nothing, because the room didn't know it was a question. Her chin came up half an inch. It's the escrow file for the settlement from my accident. You were in an accident? In November. Which hospital? She said, I'm not doing this. And she took her plate to the sink. And my mother said, Leave your sister alone about her accident. I let it go. I let it go because the thing I wanted was already in my bag, in an envelope, with a stamp on it. and I was going to mail it on my way home whether she answered me or not. Here's what was in the envelope. And here is the one and only clever thing I did in this entire story. When a house is sold under a power of attorney, the buyer's title insurer has to be willing to insure that deed. They don't care about feelings. They care about whether the principal had the capacity to grant the authority. Because if she didn't, the deed is a piece of paper with a stranger's signature on it and their underwriter eats the loss. I read title commitments for a living. I know exactly which department opens which envelope. So I wrote a one-page letter, on my own letterhead of nothing, and I mailed it to the underwriting counsel of the title insurer named in the commitment on 118 Wynn Street, and I attached 3 things: the certified copy of the recorded power of attorney with the 410 timestamp on page 4, the Fairview Hospital discharge summary from the same afternoon, showing my grandmother could not state the month or the year at 4:10 p.m., and Ruth Okonjo's discharge documentation from Belhaven. The letter said, in effect, I am the healthcare representative of the principal named in this instrument. Here are the facts. I am not asking you for anything. You do not ask an underwriter for anything. You put an underwriter on notice, and then you stand back, because there is nothing on this earth more relentless than a company that has just realized it might have to pay. The closing was set for Friday, April 24th, at 10 in the morning, at a title office 2 towns over. At 3:15 on Thursday afternoon, the underwriter faxed an exception onto the commitment. Title insurance would not be issued on any conveyance executed under the durable power of attorney recorded March 2, 2026, absent a court order confirming authority, and requested a physician's statement of the principal's capacity as of the date of execution. There is no physician on this earth who is going to write that statement, because at 4:10 that afternoon a doctor had already written the opposite one, in a hospital, in a chart. The buyers walked at 5:40 p.m. Their agent sent Grant one line: my clients are out, we're not doing a court order on a rental. Grant lost his commission, and the $3,840 referral fee he had coming from the flipper he'd brought to the table. And I did not know about the referral fee yet. That came later in a document, the way everything came. What I knew that night was that my sister called me 19 times between 6:02 and 7:40 p.m., and I sat on my couch with the phone face up on my knee and let every one of them ring out, and on the 20th call I picked up and said, "Hello? The sale's dead," she said. She was crying. "Somebody killed the sale," I said. "That's a shame." Was it in writing? Mother's Day was the 10th of May, and my mother wanted a picture of all 3 of her daughters. We took it on the front step at Larkspur, Bethany with her arms crossed, my mother in the middle, Sloane in a maternity dress that cost $215 of my money, one hand on her stomach, me at the end. If you zoom in, only one person in it is looking at the camera. Inside, over a ham, my sister told 9 relatives that somebody in this family called the buyers and killed Grand's sale. My Aunt Junie said, "Who would do that?" Sloane said, "Ask the one who does the paperwork." 9 people looked at me. My father looked at the ham. I said, "I've never spoken to the buyers." Which was true, and which is the sentence I chose out of the 14 true sentences available to me. And my mother said, "See? Enough," and served pie. And everybody moved on, because in that house the truth has never been a destination, only a way of changing the subject. Then my mother took me into the front hall and picked up the blue bin. You have to understand this bin. Plastic, faded, cracked at one corner, standing on the floor under the mail slot since the 90s. Every piece of paper that has ever mattered in my family has spent time in that bin. She put it in my arms. "There's insurance letters in there I can't make heads or tails of," she said. "They're threatening something. Your sister changed something and now they're sending things to me and to her both. You do this all day. Fix it." I said, "You want me to handle it?" "You're the only one who can talk to these people." I carried my mother's mail out of my mother's house at her request, with her standing in the doorway telling me to take my time. I went through it on my kitchen floor at 11 o'clock that night with the cotton gloves on. The insurer's Special Investigations Unit had opened a review on the 24th of April, 16 days after a change of payee designation arrived on a policy that had been quietly paying to the same address for 33 months. That's all it takes. A change is a flag. The letter to my mother asked her to provide, within 20 days, an accounting of which facility charges each benefit payment had been applied to, the deposit account every check had been negotiated into, and an explanation of the discrepancy between benefits paid and the provider's records, which reflect payment of the resident's balance from a third-party source. The third-party source was me, 38 months of me. There was also a second letter, dated May 6th, addressed to Sloan and copied to my mother, and this one was 2 sentences long, and it was the one that made me put my hand over my mouth at midnight. It said benefits could not be paid for care at a residence that is not a licensed provider, that the insurer had been informed the insured was discharged to a private residence in Rockvale, Ohio, and that all further payments were suspended as of May 1st pending verification of licensure. They had moved my grandmother out of a licensed memory unit and into a cul-de-sac to save $600 a month, and in doing it they had switched off the $1,180 a month that had been paying for her since 2023. Nobody made that happen. Nobody arranged it. They did it to themselves with their own hands, and then they carried the letters to me in a plastic bin and asked me to make them go away. I did not make them go away. I photocopied all of it at the drugstore on Monday morning, and I put my mother's originals back in the bin, and on Tuesday I drove the bin to Larkspur and set it inside the door, and my mother said, "Well, what is it?" I said, "It's an investigation." "An investigation of what?" "Of who is paid," I said. "There's a form in there. It asks you which account the checks went into." She stood in her own front hall and looked at a plastic bin on the floor. "There," I said. "Now it's real." I let myself out. 9 days after Mother's Day, my sister tried to fix everything with a notary. I know the drive because Charlene Boggs told my Aunt Junie, and my Aunt Junie tells everyone. I know what happened at the counter because 6 weeks later, a woman named Priya Raghunathan read her own handwriting off a journal to an investigator, and I was in the hallway outside that office waiting to sign a statement of my own, and Terrence Boyle read me the summary afterward, because by then I was the complainant on the acknowledgement count. On May 19th, Sloan drove out to Rockvale, put my grandmother in the front seat of her car without a coat, and took her to a pack-and-post storefront in a strip mall on Route 20 because the sign in the window says, "Notary, Walk-ins." She had a document she'd printed off the internet. A durable power of attorney for finances, plus a payee designation, plus a page that would have made her the sole authorized party on the insurance policy. The woman behind the counter is a notary with 4 years of commission and a laminated card of the rules taped to her register. She asked my grandmother for photo identification. My grandmother handed her a Bellhaven activities schedule. She asked my grandmother to state her full name and today's date. My grandmother said, "It's a lovely day." She asked my grandmother if she understood that she was giving another person control of her money, and my grandmother said, "Is my ride here?" Priya Raghunathan refused the notarization. Then she did the thing that ended my sister. She wrote it in her journal, because her employer's rules card says to log every refusal with the reason, and she wrote, at 2:40 p.m. on 5/19/26, refused, signer unable to state name or date, no ID, accompanied by daughter-claimed granddaughter who answered for her. Sloan drove her 40 minutes back to the cul-de-sac and told Charlene the appointment went fine. Then she sold the dining room set out of 118 Wynn Street to a man on Marketplace for $400, including the table my grandmother had rolled pierogi on every Christmas Eve since 1974, and she posted the money on her story with a caption about doing what she had to do. 10 days after that, the second thing I had planted went off, and this one did not knock. It arrived by certified mail on the 29th of May, and my sister brought it to my apartment because she still, in that moment, thought I was the person you brought paper to. 3 pages, from a law firm in Columbus, and the letterhead had two names on it that both ended in H. Notice of Material Breach and Demand, Case 2025-1108. The carrier had consumed alcohol during the gestational period. The intended parents had received photographic evidence of the carrier consuming wine at a public family event on March 7th at approximately 8:20 p.m. At 13 weeks gestation by the clinic's own dating, in the presence of numerous witnesses, the carrier had failed to attend two scheduled monitoring appointments. The carrier had made representations to third parties concerning the paternity of the fetus, in direct violation of the confidentiality and representation clauses of the agreement. All disbursements terminated. Demand for return of the $13,150 already disbursed, and forfeiture of the balance of a $34,000 schedule. Notice that the intended parents intended to seek immediate enforcement of the pre-birth order establishing their parentage, and that the firm had preserved copies of the photograph, which was published to a public social media account by a family member on the evening in question, and which remains publicly available. My Aunt Junie posted 41 photographs from Riccardi's that night. She tagged everybody, she always does. There is one at 8:21 p.m. of Sloane laughing with a glass of Chianti at her lips and my hand still in the frame, holding the bottle by the neck. Sloane sat on my kitchen floor with those 3 pages and said, "They can't take her, she's mine. I'm the one carrying her." I said, "That's what you told 31 people." She looked up at me. "Sloane," I said, "whose baby is it?" And my sister, who had told a room full of strangers that neither of her sisters could hold a man, put her face in her hands and said, "I don't know how to get out of this." I gave her a glass of water and a box of tissues. I did not put my hand on her back. At 1:12 the next morning, my phone lit up with my older sister's name for the first time since March, and Bethany's voice when I answered was very flat and very quiet. "Diana, why is there $26,000 gone out of the wedding account?" I did not tell my older sister anything that night. I asked her one question. "Bethany, have you asked him what it was for?" "He says it was deposits." "Then ask him for the receipts for the deposits," I said. "And Beth, get the statements yourself. From the bank. On paper. Don't let him print them for you." 3 days later, she pulled into my lot at 7 in the morning with a duffel bag on the back seat and a manila envelope on the front, and she had been awake all night, and she was 33 years old and she looked 19. The joint wedding account had been opened in December of 2025. $26,400 had left it in 11 transfers between January and April of 2026, and every one of them went to the same account, and my sister Sloane's initials were in 3 of the memo lines because Grant is not a careful man. Bethany had already had the conversation, at 4 a.m., in the kitchen of a rental they had signed a lease on together, and she had made him say it out loud. 3 things. That it happened once in October at a wedding in Sandusky, and he had been drinking. The 11th of October. He remembered the date because it was on the invitation on their refrigerator. October cannot produce a 13-week pregnancy in March. Any one of the 31 people at Riccardi's could have worked that out on their fingers between the toast and the cake, and not one of them did, and neither did he, because she said it with her hand on her stomach and my mother said, "Don't make a scene." That when Sloane told him in January that she was pregnant, he had believed her, and he had started paying her, and every month he paid her, he was buying 1 more month of Bethany not knowing, and that in March, when Sloane needed a second witness on a document at our mother's kitchen table, he had signed it and gone out to his car and sat there for 20 minutes, and then he had gone back inside and had a piece of cake. He signed it because she had him, Bethany said. She was on my kitchen floor in the same spot Sloane had sat on 4 days earlier, which is exactly what my family is. He didn't even get anything. She just had him. I said, "He got $3,840 because it was in the envelope." Bethany had gone to the bank like I told her, and while she was in there, she had also asked for the closing file on Wynn Street because her name was on the buyer's referral form as a contact, and the flipper's referral fee to Grant M. Whitaker, licensed agent, was itemized on page 2 of a settlement statement that never got signed. My sister looked up at me from my kitchen floor and said the first honest thing anyone in my family had said to me since 2023. "You knew all of it? In March? You've known since March." "Not all of it. Why didn't you tell me?" And here's what I said, and I've thought about whether it was fair, and I've decided it was true, which is not the same thing. "Because in March you were still holding her plate." She stayed. She has been in my spare room ever since. On the 6th of June, my family threw my sister a baby shower. 31 people had watched her announce that pregnancy in March. 19 showed up in June, in my mother's backyard under a rented canopy, with a sheet cake that said, "Welcome Adele Rose in pink gel." I went. People always ask me why. Because it was the last time all of them would be in one place before I put paper in the hands of the county, and I wanted to see it. I have earned the right to want to see it. My mother put me on drinks and ice. Sloane sat in a wicker chair with a ribbon on it and opened gifts, 26 weeks and glowing. And when the cake came out, my mother lifted a plastic cup of lemonade and gave a toast in her own yard. "To the only grandchild I'm ever getting," she said, "and to the girl who was brave enough to give her to us." 19 people said, "Aw." Sloane looked at me over the top of the cake and said, loud enough for the canopy, "Diana, can you take a picture of us? You're good at standing there." I took the picture. I took 4. They're good pictures. Then Sloane asked me to run the gift list, so I sat in a folding chair with a legal pad and wrote down every single thing that came out of a bag, and the total value of the items given to my sister on the 6th of June, 2026, in expectation of a baby that a court in Franklin County had already declared belonged to 2 other people, was $1,960. That list is now Exhibit 11. On Monday the 8th of June, I took a personal day. I want you to know what a cold woman looks like on the day she does it. I wore my work clothes. I copied everything twice into 2 accordion folders, with a sticky tab on every page I intended a stranger to read. 9:40 a.m. County Department of Job and Family Services, Adult Protective Services intake. I sat across from an intake worker and I did not editorialize once. I gave her the certified copy of the power of attorney with the 410 acknowledgement. I gave her the Fairview discharge summary from the same afternoon. I gave her Ruth Okonjo's documentation. I gave her the insurer's suspension letter naming an unlicensed residence, the payee change signed S. Paxton, the 33 payment benefit statement addressed to Larkspur Court, and my own bank records showing 38 transfers of $1,180 with Bellhaven Gap in the memo line. She got to the 4th page and stopped and said, "Ma'am, is she still in the Rockvale residence right now?" I said, "She's in a rear bedroom with 2 beds and no chart." 11:15 a.m. The County Prosecutor's Office, Economic Crimes Unit, 2nd floor, a form and a wait, and then 12 minutes with an investigator named Terrence Boyle, who took the second accordion folder and read for 10 of the 12 minutes without saying anything at all. He said, "Who's the notary on the acknowledgement?" I said, "My mother." He said, "Okay," and wrote for a while, and then he said, "You understand this is going to be an open file about your mother." I said, "It's been an open file about my grandmother for 3 years. Nobody opened it." 1:30 p.m. I mailed a complaint to the Ohio Secretary of State's Notary Division, on the form, with the commission number typed in the box, and copies attached. 2:10 p.m. I mailed a complaint to the Ohio Division of Real Estate and Professional Licensing regarding a licensed agent who served as a witness on a power of attorney and stood to collect a referral fee on the same transaction, with page 2 of the settlement statement attached. The next morning, I went back to work and closed a refinance for a couple buying out a mother-in-law. I did not tell one member of my family that I had done any of it. Not Bethany. Not my father. For 2 weeks, nothing happened. And my sister had the best 2 weeks she'd had all spring. She got a lawyer for the Columbus thing, a real one, on a payment plan. And she told everyone the escrow company was going to settle, and she went back to the crib website. On the 22nd of June, a county car pulled onto a cul-de-sac in Rockvale with 2 people in it, an APS investigator named Marisol Vega and a county nurse. They were there for 50 minutes. The nurse counted 11 medications in a shoebox in a kitchen cupboard. 6 of them prescribed to my grandmother. 3 of them prescribed to a resident who had died in February. 2 of them expired. There was no medication administration record in the house. There were 4 residents and 1 caregiver, and 1 exterior door with a hasp block on the outside of it. Charlene Boggs told them my grandmother's family handled all of that. On the 1st of July, I filed an application in probate court for emergency guardianship of the person and estate of Adele M. Paxton, and I attached the APS findings, and the court set a hearing and appointed my grandmother her own lawyer, which is the single best thing that has ever happened to my grandmother in 3 years, because that man's only job on this earth was to want what she wanted. On the 1st of July, the magistrate granted an emergency guardianship of the person, 72 hours, extended to 30 days on the 3rd, extended again on the 30th, and set the full hearing for August. On the 6th of July, my grandmother went back to Belhaven, room 12, at the end, with the finch feeder outside the window. Ruth Okonjo had written her name on a strip of masking tape and stuck it over the door number, because a printed nameplate takes a week, and she said she was not waiting a week. I was there when they wheeled her in. She looked at the tape on the doorframe and said, "Well, that's my name." Then she said, "Who's paying for all this?" And I said, "Your husband Gran. He thought of everything." She said, "He did. You know." And she patted my hand like I was a nice girl from a bank, and I went into the parking lot and sat in my car and did not drive anywhere for 20 minutes. The rest of July was the part nobody believes, and it was all mail. On the 14th, the Ohio Secretary of State served my mother with a notice of intent to revoke her commission and referred the acknowledgement to the prosecutor. 22 years. Vance and Doyle put her on unpaid leave the same week and terminated her on the 31st, because an insurance agency cannot carry a notary who is under a revocation notice for a false acknowledgement. Their own errors and omissions carrier makes that decision for them. She called me 11 times that day. The voicemail I kept says, "You have destroyed this family over a house that wasn't yours." On the 21st, the Division of Real Estate filed a formal complaint against Grant's license over the referral fee and the witness signature and set it for hearing, and his broker terminated him by email at 4:40 in the afternoon and copied the office. On the 28th, Terrence Boyle called me at work to say the case had gone to the grand jury, that I would get a subpoena, and to ask whether anyone in my family had contacted me about my testimony. I said, "Everyone in my family has contacted me about everything." Sloan came to my door on the 3rd of August at 9 at night. 34 weeks. Standing on my landing in a t-shirt of Grant's, holding her lawyer's letter, and my older sister was in my spare room with the door shut, listening, and I knew she was listening. "They're charging Mom," Sloan said. "I know. She's 58, Diana. She's going to have a record. For a stamp." She was shaking. "You did this to your own mother over a woman who doesn't know what year it is." "She knows who came," I said. "I'm having a baby in 6 weeks." "You're delivering a baby in 6 weeks," I said. "That's not the same sentence." "It hasn't been the same sentence since December." And then she said the thing that told me she had never, at any point, been sorry. "You could stop it. You're the one who does the paperwork. You could go in there and say it was a misunderstanding and they'd listen to you, because they always listen to you, and none of them ever listened to me." I stood in my doorway. "Sloan," I said, "I never once said anything about you. Everything they have is something you signed." She hit the door frame with the flat of her hand and cried the way she has cried since she was 4 years old, which is loudly and facing the audience, and I let her stand there for a full minute, and then I did the only merciful thing I had left, which I have never regretted and never enjoyed. "You've got a monitoring appointment on the 7th, I said. "It's on the letter in your hand. Your car's not insured and Grant's gone. I'll drive you." She looked up. "This ride is for the baby," I said. "Don't talk to me in the car. On the 7th of August, I drove my sister 2 hours to Columbus and sat in a parking garage for 90 minutes with a book I did not read. She got in the car afterward and said, "They said everything's normal." And I said, "Good." And we drove 135 miles in silence. And that is the last conversation my sister and I have had that wasn't in a hallway with a lawyer in it. That night, my older sister opened her bedroom door and asked me if the wedding was still on. It was 15 days out. The 22nd of August, 4 in the afternoon. The deposits were gone. The venue was gone. The dress was in my closet in a bag. Bethany said, "I already called them. I called them in June. I just didn't tell anybody." Silent since March, both of us. That's when I understood that whatever this family did to me, it did to her too. And she had just been doing it with her mouth shut in a different room. I met them once, before any of it finished. The 30th of July, a diner off Route 23 in Marion, because it was halfway, and because I asked. Dean Halloway had the same barn jacket. Claire Halloway is a pediatric nurse practitioner with Gray coming in at the part. I said, "I'm not here to give you anything. There are court dates in my family that are going to move around, and nobody was going to tell you." Dean turned his coffee cup a quarter turn. "We didn't want a war," he said. "We wanted a daughter. 11 years. And then a woman at a family dinner told a room full of people that our daughter belonged to a man in Millbury." Claire said, "Was your grandmother there?" I said yes. She said, "Was she clapping?" And I said yes. And that is the only time in 5 months that I came apart in front of a stranger. And she pushed a napkin across the table and did not say one word about it, which is what a good nurse does. The full guardianship hearing was the 11th of August at 9 in the morning in probate court, room 2B, with a bench and a flag and no audience except my family. They all came, my mother in her church suit, my father in a jacket I recognized from 2004, Sloane in the back row with her lawyer, 35 weeks, Bethany beside me. My grandmother's court-appointed attorney sat at the end of the table with a legal pad and asked, twice, what his client wanted, because that was his only job. It took 50 minutes. Nobody screamed. That is the thing nobody tells you about the end. It happens at a normal volume. The magistrate read the APS findings into the record. She read the 410 acknowledgement and the Fairview discharge summary, one after the other, in the same tone. And when she got to the mini mental exam score of 11 out of 30, she paused for exactly as long as it took to turn a page, and my mother made a sound in the second row. She read Priya Raghunathan's journal entry from the 19th of May. Refused. Signer unable to state name or date. No identification, accompanied by daughter-claimed granddaughter who answered for her. She voided every instrument executed under the March 2nd power of attorney. She ordered an accounting of all funds received on Adele Paxton's behalf since June of 2023. She appointed me guardian of the person and estate, with bond, and she set the first accounting for November. Then she said, "Ms. Paxton, this house on Wynn Street, is it habitable?" I said, "It's got a dining room with no table in it. Otherwise, yes." "Then don't sell it before you talk to me," she said. And at the end, when it was over and everybody stood up, I did the last thing on my list, and I did it in a courtroom because there is nowhere on this earth harder to make a scene. I had 4 copies of one page printed the night before. Guardianship Contact and Visitation, Bellhaven Memory Unit. Visitors must be on the authorized list maintained by the guardian. Requests for changes in care, room, medication, or finances go to the guardian in writing. Any person removing the resident from the facility without written authorization is subject to report. I gave one to my mother, one to my father, one to my sister's lawyer, because you do not hand paper to a party who is represented. My mother read hers standing under a wall clock and said, "You're going to keep me from my own mother." I said, "Your name's on the list, Mom. Page 2. Sundays, in the day room, with the door open." She looked at page 2 for a long time. Then my grandmother's attorney came over with Ruth Okonjo, who had driven 40 minutes to sit in the back of a courtroom on a Tuesday, and Ruth had a manila folder against her chest with both arms crossed over it. "There's something in her file," she said. "It's been in her file. It was never mine to hand to anybody until this morning." She gave it to the guardian. That's the rule. That morning, the guardian was me. It was one sheet of Belhaven letterhead with handwriting on both sides, dated the 9th of February 2023, 11 days after she moved on to the memory unit, when she still had most of her afternoons. Witnessed at the bottom by the facility chaplain and by Ruth Okonjo RN, because my grandmother had asked 2 people to watch her write it. I read it in the hallway outside room 2B, standing up, and I am going to read it to you the way it is written, because she wrote in complete sentences her entire life. To whoever is doing the arguing, I have thought about the house on Wynn Street. Sell it. Do not fight over it. A house is a thing that keeps you warm and then keeps you angry. Sell it and split it 3 ways between my granddaughters evenly, including Sloane. Especially Sloane. She is the one who will need it, because she is the one who has never once been asked to be useful, and nobody in that family has ever told her no, and that is not a gift. It is a debt they gave her. Second, move me to a shared room. I have looked at the price list. I do not need a private room to forget my own name in. Whatever the difference is, it goes to the girls, and I want that written down. Third, Diana, you are the only one who will read this far. I know what you send every month. Ruth told me, because I asked her directly, and she is not a liar. Stop it. Stop paying. I did not raise a girl to be the receipt for a family that never opens its mail. Start living, sweetheart. Go to the lake. Take somebody with you. Also, the ring is yours. You did the dishes. I want to tell you that I felt triumphant in that hallway, on the day I won everything, holding proof that the woman I had been protecting had asked me, 3 years ago, to stop. I did not feel triumphant. I sat down on a bench outside a probate courtroom with a page of my grandmother's handwriting in my hands, and understood that she had been trying to give me permission for 3 years, and that a form had been sitting in a folder 11 days into her diagnosis, and that not one person in my family had ever asked what was in her file, because none of them ever handled the paperwork. And then I understood the harder part, which took me until that evening. Split it 3 ways, including Sloane. Especially Sloane. I had, that morning, been made guardian of an estate that was owed $38,940 in misdirected insurance benefits, plus 2 more payments nobody has accounted for yet, and a house worth $214,000. And I had a criminal file open against my sister and my mother, and I could have taken every legal step available to me to see that Sloane Paxton never received 1 cent of Adele Paxton's estate. I had it in my hand. Nobody would have blamed me. Bethany told me to my face that night that nobody would have blamed me. I filed the letter with the court on the 13th, as an instrument reflecting the ward's expressed wishes, and I asked the magistrate to make the 3rd share subject to restitution first, and to hold it in trust, and to pay it out to Sloane after every dollar owed to my grandmother came back. Not because I forgave her, because my grandmother wrote it down while she could still write, and I have spent 3 years being the only person in this family who does what the paperwork actually says. On the 14th of August at 11 in the morning, my sister came to Belhaven. She was not on the list. She got as far as the day room because a temp at the front desk saw a pregnant woman and a family resemblance, and Ruth called me at work. And I got there in 12 minutes and stood in the doorway and did not go in, because my grandmother's attorney had told me one useful thing. Let the record be about her, not about you. Sloane was sitting on the ottoman in front of my grandmother's chair with a folded paper in her hand. Not a legal document this time. She'd written it herself, in pen, and I've since seen it. A letter saying she forgave her family, and asking Gran to say to anyone who came asking that Sloane had always taken care of her. My grandmother was in the wing chair by the window with the finch feeder outside it, in the pearl pink polish, with the garnet ring back on her middle finger, where I had put it on the 12th, 2 days after her lawyer's office returned it in a padded envelope from my sister's attorney, itemized as personal property of the ward. Sloane said, "Gran, it's me, it's Sloane. Do you know me?" And my grandmother looked at her for a while, with the pleasant, patient face. The one she gives a stranger who is being kind to her. "I don't know you, sweetheart," she said, "but you can have a cookie." 31 people heard my sister say she was the only one carrying anything. One woman in a wing chair who could not name the month took it all back in 11 words. Then she added, "They're on the cart." And she meant it. Sloane put her face down on the arm of the chair and cried, and my grandmother patted her hair the way you comfort somebody else's child at a bus stop, and then said, over her, to me in the doorway, "Is my ride here?" There were 2 men in the lobby when Sloane came out at 11:40. One was a deputy from the sheriff's office. The other was Terrence Boyle, who had called me on the 12th to ask a single question, which was whether I knew where my sister was likely to be that week. And I had answered it the way I have answered every question in this story, which is truthfully. He served her in the lobby by the aquarium, quietly, with his back to the room. 2 counts of forgery, tampering with records, theft from a person in a protected class, which in Ohio is a felony, and the degree of it depends on the number, and the number in the indictment is $38,940, because they charged the 2 of them on one course of conduct, because my grandmother is 84 years old and the law calls that a protected class, and the law is right. She signed for the papers on a clipboard. I did not watch the rest. I went back to the day room and I sat down on the ottoman, and my grandmother reached over and took my right hand and turned it over like she was checking it for splinters. Then she worked the garnet ring off her own finger, and she took the roll of masking tape off the activities cart beside her chair, because there is always masking tape on the activities cart, and she wound 3 turns of it around the back of the band with hands that shook, and she pushed it onto my finger and closed my fingers over it. "There," she said. "Garnet likes hot water." Today is the 19th of August. 5 days. The sycamore in the Bellhaven courtyard has 1 yellow leaf on the lowest branch, and the finch feeder needs filling twice a week now instead of once, because they know what's coming even when nothing else does. Here is where everybody landed, and I'm going to go around the table the way we sat at Riccardi's, because I promised you that at the beginning. Sloane is at our parents' house on Larkspur, arraigned on the 17th, released on her own recognizance, trial date set for the 6th of October. The Halloway's firm is pursuing the $13,150 she was already paid. The court in Franklin County entered the pre-birth order in May. The Halloway's names are the ones that go on the birth certificate. She will deliver in about 3 weeks, in a hospital in Columbus, with a nurse she doesn't know holding her hand, and she will not be a mother when she goes home, because she never was going to be. That was decided in a conference room in November by a woman who signed her name on a line that said, "Carrier for $4,250 a month." The 1/3 of my grandmother's house that she'll get someday is sitting in a trust, because an 84-year-old woman with a mini mental score of 11 left written instructions that she be included. And I am the one who filed them. My mother's commission is gone. The notice of intent came on the 14th of July, and she surrendered it rather than sit through a hearing, and Vance and Doyle terminated her on the 31st. She has a complicity count and a false acknowledgement count and a pre-trial in September, and she is 58, and she is doing intake paperwork for a temp agency in Elyria for $16 an hour, which is the same work she used to charge $5 a signature for. She sold her stamp for a grandchild. There is no grandchild, and there is no stamp. She's on the visitor list. Sundays, in the day room, door open. She has come twice. Both times, she sat with her purse on her knees and said very little, and last Sunday she asked me, out of nowhere, in front of the Finches, "Did she really write that in February?" I said, 11 days in. She said, "She never told me anything." I said, "You never opened the mail she got, Mom?" You just sorted it. Grant's license is suspended in front of a commission hearing this fall that he has already told everyone he will not attend. He owes Bethany $26,400 on a civil judgment she filed herself in July, and the $3,840 he never got to collect is a line on a settlement statement that will be read out loud at my mother's trial. He is living with his brother in Toledo selling used trucks, and his mother mailed Bethany the Little League photo album with a note that said she was sorry, which I thought was decent of her. The buyers he brought to Wynn Street pulled out in April over an exception on a title commitment. The flipper who was going to pay him a referral fee for a house at $128,000 sold nothing because the house is not for sale. Because the magistrate told me not to sell it before I talk to her, and I always do what the magistrate says. My father comes on Sundays too, at a different hour than my mother, which was his idea. He sits with Gran and holds the yarn while she winds it. He has not asked me to drop anything, or explain anything, or forgive anybody. And last week he brought a new battery for her hearing aid without being asked, and put it in himself, and got it right on the second try. Charlene Boggs's house on the cul-de-sac was closed by the state in July, on the county's referral. 4 residents were placed in licensed facilities. She has a hearing of her own coming. Priya Raghunathan, the notary at the Pack and Post on Route 20, will be called at trial to read 18 words out of her own journal. I sent her a card. Bethany is in my spare room, which she now calls hers, and she went back for the 2 semesters she quit in 2016, and she is on the witness list, and she does the dishes at my apartment without being asked. In March, she was holding her sister's plate. In July, she carried the guardianship exhibits into probate court because my arms were full. Ruth Okonjo wrote my grandmother's name on a strip of masking tape and stuck it over a door number because she was not going to wait a week for a nameplate. Dean and Claire Halloway sent a card to Belhaven in July, addressed to Adele Paxton, thanking her for something they didn't explain. Ruth read it to her twice. Gran said, "How nice. Do we know them?" And my grandmother is in room 12 on the memory unit, by the window with the finch feeder, in the pearl pink polish, and on Friday afternoon she said, out of nowhere, in the middle of a puzzle, "I'd like to see the water, before it gets cold." Belhaven will sign a resident out for a family event if the responsible party fills out the form. It's 3 pages. It has a section where you list the medications and the times. I filled it out last night at my own kitchen table, in pen, with the ring on my hand and 3 turns of masking tape holding it on. Saturday the 22nd, which was going to be a wedding. 9 in the morning to 4 in the afternoon. 2 adults accompanying. Diana R. Paxton, guardian. Bethany A. Paxton, granddaughter. Destination: Lake Erie, Huntington Beach, the pier at the end where you can see the water start to move. I have filled out that form 11 times in 3 years for other people's engagement dinners and other people's Christmases. This is the first one I've ever filled out for her. That's the whole thing. 31 guests, 5 months, 1 folder, and a woman in a wing chair who gave away the last thing she owned to the granddaughter who did the dishes. I want to tell you the one thing I learned, and then I'll let you go. I always thought the dangerous sentence in my family was, "Neither of you could hold a man." It wasn't. It was a much smaller one, and my mother said it to me at a kitchen table in 2023, and I let her again 600 times after that. It's handled. You just cover the gap. Nobody ever tells you who's doing the handling. That's the whole trick. If you are the one in your family who fills out the forms, pays the difference, drives the 135 miles, and never asks to see the statement, then you are not the person keeping that family together. You are the gap. And a family that has found a gap will spend it. So here is my question, and I do want your answer. Is there a number in your life that somebody else gave you, a gap you cover, a difference you make up, a bill you were told was yours? Have you ever once asked to see the paperwork behind it? Tell me in the comments. Tell me what happened when you asked. And if you're the one in your family who does all the forms and gets thanked with the word reliable, say so. I promise you the comment section under this story is full of you. Thank you for staying with me through all 5 months of it. Take care of the person in your family who handles things. And if nobody is handling things for you, go look in the file yourself. Mine had a letter in it, waiting 11 days into the worst year of her life, and it took me 3 years to open the folder. I'll see you next time.